coming to Hamilton in 2024. Just sort of interested in your impressions of the city and especially the city's music scene.
Yeah, you guys have great food here. It's. I mean, and I come from Paris, so I know you have a lot of energy and people that work really hard, really seriously to make things happen. And I think that's. I was surprised. I didn't expect sort of that level of commitment and love from the people in the community towards their art scene and cultural scene.
Welcome to Gritty History, a podcast from the City of Hamilton and Hamilton Civic Museums, taking you beyond the physical museums and diving into the fascinating stories from the city's past and present. In this audio series, we'll explore the people and places that make Hamilton, Ontario so special. Our first series, Liner Notes, digs into the work of Hamilton music. My name is Meredith Leonard, and I'm a senior curator at Hamilton Civic Museums. Joining me for this series is Russ Piva, aka Stereo Russ, musician and host of Inside the Music with Stereo Russ. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's press play.
French-born conductor James Kahane is the 9th musical director of the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra. He began his tenure in September 2024 at the age of 28 and is also the principal conductor of the Helsinki Chamber Orchestra. James joins us today at CFMU Studios to share his experiences at the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra. James, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Well, you're welcome.
To get us started, could you maybe share a little bit about your musical background and how you found your way from France to Hamilton?
Yeah, well, my musical background is a little bit weird because I come from a family that are not musicians. Well, that's pretty common, but I also started investing myself seriously in music pretty late, only at age 16. I had piano lessons before that, but I wasn't exactly taking it very seriously. So anyhow, at around age 15, 16, I sort of geared myself towards a musician's career, and I got especially interested in classical music and conducting, sort of because of the team aspect element, because of the being at the center of a group, and that was sort of much more appealing to me than being alone at my keyboard every evening. So, I wanted to study conducting. I did some lessons. I went to some schools and so on, and eventually I found my way in Finland. Finland has one of the sort of most renowned conducting classes in the world. And that's how I ended up being there. I did my entire bachelor's and master's degree in orchestral conducting there. I had very good teachers. And after that, I worked a little bit there as freelancer, and I joined my orchestra, the Helsinki Chamber Orchestra, as principal conductor. I also had some other positions. And then I ended up working here in Hamilton as music director.
I'm curious to know, what is it or was it about orchestral music that got you really excited?
That's a good question. I can't really say. It might have something to do with, something like with childhood. My parents, they weren't really big classical music listeners. But they had hundreds and hundreds of CDs, and almost none of them were classical music except one or two, which were like these typical things you would find at the time, like compilations of like top 50 best classical music pieces and so on and so on. And I just remember that my favorite tracks on those CDs were always the symphonic works. So even when I started taking piano seriously, my teacher was a little bit puzzled because I kept asking her whether I could just play arrangements of reductions to piano of symphonic music, which was not what she wanted to teach me.
What did she want to teach you?
Oh, she wanted to teach me proper piano, like proper etudes and preludes and all these things, piano suites and. Reductions are something like, there are pieces that are intended for a symphony orchestra that have been transcribed for piano to make it sort of playable.
I want to set the stage here for folks out there who may be new to orchestral music. You're still connected to the Helsinki Chamber Orchestra, and you're here in Hamilton for the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra. For all those out there, can you kind of explain what the difference is between chamber and philharmonic?
Yes, it comes down to the size. A chamber orchestra is much smaller. Usually it ranges from, I'd say, 13 players to maybe 30 players. So whether a philharmonic orchestra will usually be at least 40 musicians and potentially up to 100 or even a little bit more. Yeah, so it's really just about the size.
And so for context, then the Hamilton Philharmonic, how many people or players are in that orchestra?
Well, we have a lot of extras, but usually in our concerts we are always between, or most of the time, between 50 players to upwards to 80 players or even 90 players on very special occasions.
What does a day-to-day look like for you?
Interestingly, even though there is the name, the word director in my title, I'm first and foremost a conductor. So most of my day, most of my time goes to studying scores and learning music. I would say that in my workload, that's at least like 70% of what I do. I mean, outside rehearsals, of course. And then the rest of the time, it's a lot of, like planning ahead our seasons. Me and the rest of the team, we choose the guest artists, we choose the guest conductors, we make the programs, we make new collaborations, we launch partnerships, and all that requires meetings and lots of email exchanges and things like that.
The HPO has got a really rich history in the city. I think 140 years it's been in the city. What's it like to sort of come into that? And are there sort of stories from the history of the organization that have stuck with you, or people who've been involved over the years that have maybe inspired you, or that you sort of see coming through your work these days?
Well, coming to the Hamilton Philharmonic was definitely very humbling, because one thing that distinguishes especially the Hamilton Philharmonic to other regional orchestras is that it has a rich history of like great music directors, and it's a sort of very respected orchestra in North America. Basically the main takeaway for me was that with this sort of lineage of conductors that had been working, I was especially impressed by their ability to sort of each of them build on what their predecessors had been doing. So basically with each music director, like the orchestra managed to reach a new stature. And for example, there are things that now I can consider and do with the orchestra, partnerships that we can have, and guess, stars that we can bring thanks to the work of my predecessor and herself. I'm sure there are a lot of things that she was able to do and build thanks to the work of her own predecessor, and so on and so on. So that's really inspiring, because I really feel like each music director has been a sort of steward and had the sort of best, had at heart the best interest of the orchestra's future.
I know in the past at Supercrawl, the Philharmonic has collaborated with LT the Monk, who's a Hamilton hip hop artist, and I know you had one recently with Dwayne Gretzky for Valentine's Day. So I'm just curious what the process is like for maybe a non-orchestral performer to kind of integrate themselves and work with someone like yourself.
Well, we have a big team at our office that sort of looks and thinks a lot and brainstorms about what could be interesting for us to do in terms of concert offering. We try to have a sort of diverse, offering of concerts and programs with a lot of classical music, but not only. We also do film music, and we also do like more sort of pops style concerts. And our team spends a lot of time reflecting on what could work, what could be enjoyable, what makes sense artistically, what are the things that our audience would like to see here. And based on that, they will usually at some point reach some of the artists or partners that we envision for these collaborations, and sort of start making it happen, or at least work towards that. And then, of course, I also have some personal connections that I can reach out to myself when there are sort of very special partnerships that I want to make happen, whether it's artists or institutions or whatever. but to be perfectly honest, in my case, when I'm directly involved in crafting these partnerships, it has often more to do with classical music because that's my area of expertise.
So we mentioned Dwayne Gretzky, we mentioned LT the Monk. Are there other ones that come to mind, either past or present?
I'm quite proud of the guest conductors we've had, which I also consider them as collaborators. We've collaborated with Koza for an opera production, which was, the first staged, full opera production that the Hamilton Philharmonic did for a really long time, I think on like 10 years or maybe even more. And, moving forward, we also have some things in the works for future seasons, but we can't really talk about them before they are publicly announced.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Exactly.
It sounds like there are so many incredible opportunities available to people in Hamilton who are interested in this music. For those of us who are maybe new to orchestral music or new to this kind of genre, where would you suggest we start? Like, what's a good starter production to go check out, or what's one of the programs that HPO offers that might be a good sort of entryway into classical music?
I think if you've really sort of almost never been or almost never listened to classical music, I would suggest starting with perhaps our film music events, because that's actually one of the ways that I myself found myself really interested in classical music is at the very beginning when I was a kid. Like I was first more interested in film music, John Williams and whatever, and plenty others, and that's what I was listening the most. And then I found out all these connections between film music and classical music, and little by little I sort of bifurcated to classical music. So I think film music is a good start. Then if you already are used to attending our film music concerts and you want to come see, get involved in more classical music, then you could have a look at our Inside the Orchestra programs, which are really designed for like people that want to discover more and understand more about classical music, and also in a sort of shorter, more friendly format. So our Inside the Orchestra concerts are 1 hour long or 1 hour and a half long, and the audience gets to sit inside the orchestra, and it's basically like one piece that is sort of pulled apart by the host, or in one time it's going to be, for example, in March it's going to be me who's going to sort of work on explaining the piece to the audience, sort of highlighting the important bits and discussing with the audience also while they're there. So I think that's quite approachable, and also you get to be inside the orchestra, which is pretty cool.
The more knowledge you have about anything, the more you enjoy it.
Yes.
Whatever your hobby, whatever your passion is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And this might be a good time to plug your radio show, James's Classical Time Sync on CFMU.
What I do there is mostly, it's a hobby, to be perfectly honest. There is just a lot of music that I like, that I'm happy to share on the radio. And sometimes it's also a good opportunity to have interesting conversations with people about like operas or ballets there, which is something I'm trying to do more and more, like have guests and then discussing with them. So what I find very interesting when I have these guests there, and I force them to watch an opera or something, and then we discuss it, is they are actually quite surprised by how much they end up enjoying it, even though like they didn't necessarily expect it. And especially what I have found quite sort of helpful for these people is to demystify a little bit the experience. Like, you go see an opera and you go see a classical music concert, and it's all right that you don't like it, like pieces, even pieces written by geniuses are flawed, and staging can be flawed, the conductor can be flawed, whatever, and there are things that you see in a show, whether it's a concert or an opera production, that you don't like, and that you want to discuss or debate with whoever you're talking to, or even on your own. And I think that this sort of aura of like classical music, a concert is sacred, and we are not allowed to say anything bad about it ever, because it's sort of so well crafted in the first place and so miraculous, which it is miraculous. miraculous and well crafted. But people should be able to say their opinions, and I think having this freedom is also something that helps people get involved, like turning on their critics mindset.
If someone is thinking about a career in classical music, perhaps dreaming about being a conductor like yourself, what tips or guidance might you offer them?
It's a quite complex question because it really depends of your background as a musician. And, if a kid that's 12-year-old asks me this question, it's not going to be the same than if someone who's 30-year-old asks me this question. And some people start like conducting studies at 30 years old. It's not so rare, actually. I'd say I'd really recommend looking at international options for conducting careers and conducting studies, because especially in Europe, there are some schools that are really, 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 really exceptionally good. And actually, you'd be surprised, but even though you might be humble or modest, you actually might have a shot at getting accepted, because a lot of these schools assess your potential, sometimes even more than your abilities at a certain point where you apply and so on. So to a young aspiring conductor, I would really say, look at Europe, look at schools, think about what are your strengths and weaknesses, and how these, like I would say, 4 or 5 great schools can sort of reinforce your strengths and compensate your weaknesses, and try to maybe apply there, and and then to be more in detail, like I would advise a young conductor to reach out to me personally and ask me some advice, because I'm really happy to help anyone.
Say you're a young person and you end up in a position kind of like yours, where it's, you're in charge of, hundreds of people. What advice would you give someone who might be in that kind of position?
When you think rationally about this and sort of take out, I don't know, ego, anxiety, or whatever, you have spent, at the point where you start a job as a music director, you've probably spent a fair amount of time at school studying, conducting, and training to be a conductor, and you've already gathered, hopefully, quite a bit of experience as conductor in concerts. So you have you have quite a bit of experience as a sort of orchestral conductor and leader of a group. The musicians you have in front of you, especially if they are a lot older, like they are much more qualified in their instrument, and that's not going to change ever. Like they are better at playing their instrument. Obviously, that's why they are there, and but you're probably better than them at like conducting an orchestra. And you have been trained at that point. You have been trained by your school to deal with situations that are really specific to conducting. You have had, whether directly or indirectly, you've received training in leadership, and it's I really see often, people that have great careers as soloists or musicians, and at some point they decide that they want to transition to orchestral conducting. Sometimes it goes really well, but sometimes it doesn't, because they think, if I can wave my arms very well, then I'm suitable for a conducting career. First of all, waving your arms really well is actually pretty difficult. If you want to have a really good technique, it's not that easy. And second of all, like there is a lot of skills and habits and automatisms that you are sort of trained like through the years to do, how to handle a rehearsal. It's not that simple and straightforward.
It actually reminds me like a little bit, just hearing you talk about like curating, like in curating this exhibit, it's like the hard thing is not the individual part, it's like pulling it all together and making it make sense for an audience in that. So it's just as an interesting sort of parallel to our exhibition about music.
Yeah, and it's really a different kind of training. As a conductor, you should know how to play at least one instrument very well, because that informs you a little bit of the psychology of what goes behind practicing an instrument. And also, well, of course, you're a musician, so at some point it's great if you can yourself produce some sound on an instrument. But it's really there are really a lot of other things that are really important and that people don't realize before they actually start conducting. And sometimes even when they are conducting, they don't realize them.
If you're enjoying this conversation, you might want to check out the Punching In exhibition, which explores the work of Hamilton's music scene, on display at the Visitor Experience Center, located at 28 James Street North, throughout 2026. Now, back to our conversation.
If you were to break it down very, very simply, what makes a great conductor?
Well, it's a lot of things together. It's a lot of skills that are, like, individually, they are not so rare. For example, to be a great leader, to be someone that makes people want to play better or makes people play better, even if they don't want to play better. But also to be a good psychologist and someone who can sort of understand very intuitively and very easily, like sort of, understanding the mood in the room, understanding why things happen, also like the psychology of why things happen in a rehearsal, all these things. You need also a good technique and so on and so on. You need, the first condition is obviously you need to be a very good musician and, have something to say about music, have some vision of what you want things to sound like. All these things, it's not so rare to find them separately. You have people that are great leaders, people that are great musicians, people that have a great technique and so on. But a great conductor is someone that has like many of those assets in their sleeves, and that's actually pretty rare.
What's your instrument? You said there's an instrument that you have usually an expert at if you're a conductor. What?
Well, originally I'm a pianist, so that's definitely my main instrument. And then I sort of did a tiny bit of double bass and also some like timpani and percussion, just to kind of get familiarized with how it is to be inside an orchestra on the other side of the podium.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you started in music kind of so late, relatively speaking, when you were a teenager. I'm just thinking about all the different routes you could have taken, conductor, performer. And I'm just wondering, for those listening out there, maybe they want to be involved, they enjoy this kind of music. What are the other kind of positions, jobs, roles that exist at the HPO?
Oh, there's quite many, and definitely I think there is much more than people might think. Well, there are of course, we have all the musicians. I mean, that's already like, I don't know, 20 different instruments or whatever that you can pick if you are interested in actual performance. And then on the more administrative side, we have we have people we have an artistic planner. An artistic planner is someone that sort of, helps me like sort of design a season and like think about guest artists and collaborations and all these things, and also participates into bringing to life the vision I have for a season or for the orchestra as a whole. So that's a really interesting job because it's a mix between something administrative and also you still have quite some artistic input, so you also think like musically in a sense. Then you have the executive director, which is my sort of work partner and equivalent for the operational side. So it's really the person that is at the head of the orchestra's operations and make sure that everything is planned, that this orchestra actually functions in practice. Then we have people that are various managers that either deal with hiring musicians or deal with the hall or deal with instruments and hiring, making sure there are enough stands on stage and things like that. You have a librarian who is the person that will make sure that musicians have their music on their stands and handles the orchestra's library. Sometimes, we don't have our own sound engineers in the orchestra, but the hall has sound engineers and light engineers and things like that are in charge of all that side of things. So there is really a lot of things, and then marketing and and development and so on and so on. there is a lot of ways to be involved in classical music, even without being a musician.
There's so many of us who are like so interested and love the arts, like music and film, and it's not our talent area, but it's so nice to hear that there's ways that we can support that and further the goals of those organizations by using different talents that we bring.
And I think they are actually quite interesting jobs, like for the most part. My mother told me recently that when she was a student, she's German, and she moved to France, and she told me that she had lots of like little small jobs and so sort of, and that one of the most fun times she ever had when she was working as a student was when she worked at the opera house as translator. So her job was like it was before the sort of apps on the smartphone and things like that. So you would have a production with like, I don't know, German guests coming to Paris Opera, and my mother would be with them all the time and translating things back and forth. And she said it was so interesting to be involved in the sort of like inside an opera house. And she said it was one of her most fun like work experience as a student.
I'm sure your mom's part of a lot of people's really great memories of opera in Paris.
Yeah, and I think also what makes this, in my opinion, a lot of jobs around classical music fun is, I mean, first of all, you get to enjoy a lot of classical music. So if you like classical music, that's of course a big plus. And also, I must admit that, compared, if you're a doctor and or something, or even a politician or whatever, like it's stressful, but you have good reasons to be stressed. What I think is great in classical music is that there is a lot of stress around. But it's nice that at the end you can go home and think, okay, at the end of the day, it's a concert and we want to have a great concert, but, nobody's life is at stake. And I think that sort of the fact that you have this privilege of being excited and stressed about something that at the end of the day, nobody's going to die, I think is also something that participates into making these jobs like fun.
I just want to know, as far as like the Hamilton Philharmonic, how it compares on the world stage as far as philharmonics and kind of what's special and unique about the Hamilton one specifically.
Well, it's a regional orchestra, so we have basically there are different levels of orchestras. Of course, it's not like categories, rigid categories. It's more like a spectrum where you would find like like national orchestras, or like the Berlin Philharmonic typically are the best orchestra in the world and so on. And then on the lowest end of the spectrum, you would find like community orchestras, and those are a bit different, right? Because musicians are not paid, but even sort of very small regional orchestras are sort of like much smaller in size and capacities than the sort of biggest orchestras in the world. I'd say that the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra is a very good regional orchestra. It's definitely punching above its weight, which is
very Hamilton.
That's it's very.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it definitely is, and it's quite incredible. I mean, I would say even when you look at other regional orchestras in Canada, like I think it's quite impressive what the Hamilton Philharmonic is capable of pulling off.
I know the Philharmonic performs in a number of spaces around the city. Can you highlight some of those? Like where could you see the Philharmonic in Hamilton?
Well, the big the most typical place where you can see us is the First Ontario Concert Hall, which looks much better on the inside than on the outside. So don't get deterred by the
don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, don't get deterred by this block of concrete that you see from King Street or Jackson Square or whatever. So that's where we are the most often. We are once a year. You can find us at Cotton Factory. A couple of times you might find us in some church like Saint Catherine of Siena, and then we also have chamber ensembles that will sort of perform a little bit everywhere in the city, but those are like usually 4 to 8 musicians, which you can find a little bit everywhere, whether I don't know, at the public library or in the summer during Supercrawl, like on the stage there and things like that.
Just you coming to Hamilton in 2024, just sort of interested in your impressions of the city and especially the city's music scene.
Yeah. Okay. So there are lots of positives, and then there is one negative that I'd still want to mention, even though maybe it's not very Canadian to
Yes.
you know, I don't know. The great stuff that I have, which are frankly overwhelming, are I was surprised by and impressed by the friendliness of people. I was impressed by the food scene, like by how much, you know, you guys have great food here. It's I mean, and I come from Paris, you know, so I know, but it's pretty amazing, frankly. You have a lot of energy and people that work really hard, really seriously to make things happen, and I think that's. I was surprised. I didn't expect sort of that level of commitment and love from the people in the community towards the, towards their art scene and cultural scene. Now, the negative thing that I was a little bit surprised is, like, coming from Europe, I'm used to have a little bit more support and energy coming from the city and the politicians and I don't know. I have the feeling that the city is not really doing much for the art scene in general, and that sometimes the art scene is basically doing things in spite of the city. And I'm not talking about us as the Hamilton Philharmonic. I mean us, the artists, because there is so many things the city could do. And I see it in Europe very easily with basically no cost at all. That they just don't do because they don't know.
It's interesting you say that, because as someone who does do a lot of traveling, I'm always aware of, you know, how they do culture and arts in different cities. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, you know, what are some things that you've seen from other cities that you think Hamilton could bring and do to really support the arts?
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit with this question and give two elements. I think the first thing that is very prevalent in European cities, sometimes it's even really impressive, is like the city could do much more to advertise the art scene, because I think it's a little bit sad that if I go outside in the street, I see all these banners that say Hamilton City of Music, but then in the entire city I don't see a single advertisement for any music at all. And I think that comes across as somewhat ironic, to be perfectly honest, as a European. In Paris, they have some rule, for example, where I don't remember the exact number, but like 10 or 15% of advertisement must be reserved for the arts. And if we had something along those lines, or if the city directly helped advertising the arts themselves, like, that would be so incredibly helpful and reinvigorating for the art scene as a whole. And there are so many easy ways to do it that basically don't cost money. So I hope that we see some development there. And then the second thing that is also really prevalent in European cities is that they are very invested in their art spaces very often. So, for example, in many cities, the concert hall is not just a concert hall. They will turn it into a sort of hub where you will have a cafeteria and you will have a restaurant and you will have like workshops and you will have whatever, maybe even in a small museum. And when I see something like, I know it's privately owned, but when I see First Ontario Concert Hall, I see, you know, well, you are at the center of the city, like there are basically built-in restaurant and cafeteria. In theory, I don't know about the logistics and so sort of, but you could really easily have a coffee shop open there, like during day business hours, and make maybe the little plaza that is in front of First Ontario Concert Hall, turn it into something a little bit nicer, plant some trees and whatever. And I think you could, like, that's what a European city would do, basically. And it's quite effective, to be perfectly honest.
I think there's something so wonderful about using culture and the arts as an anchor, and then so you're like bringing people in, like when we've in our museum buildings, when we have a cafe and we have school groups and we have people co-working, it just brings a kind of a vibrant energy to the space.
Yeah, and it has I mean, you might realize it or you might not, but it has also a lot of positive effects on the whole city, because people talk about a lot of people say the center is not safe, and that there are problems and whatever. If you give people reasons to go downtown, then automatically that's one of the first things that will contribute to make an area safer, especially at nights and evenings. So if you sort of create things and create spaces where people just will hang out for a coffee, and you put them in the center, that sort of helps. It helps the businesses around that. It helps it helps the arts as a whole. And it also helps the city, because you turn Hamilton into a nicer place to live in.
Not just a conductor,
not
city
just
planner.
City builder.
Yes. Fortunately, I don't have to do any of that. I can go home after this interview and just study scores.
This has been a wonderful interview, and I've learned so much about orchestral music. I've learned so much about the HPO, but there's been a question that I've been thinking of since the very beginning that I'm dying to ask you, and it goes back to when you first started loving this music. And I want to know, what's your favorite film score and why?
You know what? I'm gonna provide with a surprising answer, because of course there is a lot of film scores that I love, but there is one that you might not expect that I really love. There is a movie by Studio Ghibli. It's the studio that made Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke and so on. And I mean, I love all those scores. But this studio also produced, like, I think 10 or 15 years ago, a movie called Tales of Earthsea, which was a total flop. Didn't earn any money and maybe not a great movie in its own right. But that movie has exceptional score and exceptional music. One of the best, or at least one of my favorite music scores for a movie. It's incredible. It's by this one composer who wrote, who basically wrote only that, and didn't do any other movie or maybe some TV in Japan. And I know him personally, but and he's very humble and so on, and he's a great guy, and he wrote this amazing score for this movie. So yeah, that would be sort of my answer. Check out the music from Tales of Earthsea by the son of Miyazaki, Goro Miyazaki.
Amazing. I'm going to look that up right when I get home. Are there any HPO things that you wanted to promo, anywhere you want to send people? Is there anything that you want to hype or give a shout out to?
Well, the inside of the orchestra, I'm really excited for.
That sounds amazing.
Like, to sit inside an orchestra is going to be very special, and it's the first time for us. And have a look at our season, because there is really a lot of different things in there, and I'm hoping to see people in the concert hall as much as possible. I think people are always surprised and impressed by the difference between what they received in the concert hall and the experience they had versus what they expected, not knowing, like not having the experience of going to a classical music concert.
That sounds amazing, and a great thing for us to do during this year of music is get out and experience these things, these gems that exist in our community that we maybe walk by and are hustle and bustle of being downtown. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's been really inspiring and exciting.
Thank you so much, James.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gritty History Podcast, brought to you by the City of Hamilton and Hamilton Civic Museums. This episode was hosted by Meredith and Russ Piva. Produced and edited by Stereo Russ Media. Original music by Emma Whale. This series' episodes were recorded at CFMU Studios at McMaster University, Catherine North Studios, and Bridgeworks. If you enjoyed listening, please share this podcast with someone who loves all things Hamilton and history. Please rate, review, and subscribe. If you'd like to explore more, you can visit us online at hamiltoncivicmuseums.ca. Thank you for listening.